You have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions, discussions, argument, disagreements, etc.
Maybe we can open the floor first to the PhD fellows.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
we don't know. We'll wait for you. Until one of you speaks, nobody else is going to.
And the longer the silence lasts, the more difficult it gets.
I can deal with silence. Do people understand what that was about? Right, yeah, that's the first thing I want. Whose idea was that? Oh, right.
Big ol'.
Good man.
I'm not busy title, so sorry about that. I'm researching the construction of dams in Patagonia. Basically, at this moment, there is a negotiation about the possible compensations.
Yeah, yeah.
In my interviews, many of the Patagonians, people who live in Patagonia for the last 100 years,
Yeah.
they want to have a negotiation with the company. The discourse that they have said basically that they are so poor that they need something. And whatever the company can offer is better. So I'm trying to think about this topic. What happened in the case of Chile, for example, with indigenous people and with the Patagonians, who are living in marginal places in a country, who are already poor, without any support of the state, or the market, or NGOs. And basically, they don't have other opportunity more than to sell land, heritage, and community. I'm really concerned about that because they are already poor. And basically, they identify that any change, any possible change, could be better for the community.
Yeah.
Even leaving their lands, and even if they have to move to other places. So, in some sense, again, in my interviews, I feel like the environment was the commodity to defend something. Like, we don't have nothing more than the environment. So probably the future of my family is today this opportunity to solve my land, my patrimony, my community. For me, it's really sad. That's my first question. What is the situation with these communities that are already poor? And because they are poor, it's possible to build dams in their environment. And the second one is about which kind of institution have to create the compensation. The state, the companies, in the case of Chile, are the companies. So basically, the company don't want to have large compensation, just a school, a gym, some games in the plaza, and that's all. So what kind of institution can create this, can apply this framework?
Okay. A really nice question. So I'll take I'll start with the second one and then go back, because it's a slide that I took out. There's plenty of slides in there anyway. I mean, what is interesting in the compensation cases is people will often reject monetary compensations. And you can get, I mean, there's some wonderful work by Bruno Frey, where it was about citing of basically toxic dumps in Switzerland. You offer, it's a classic case of crowding out, so you offer the citing of the toxic dump. So many people will accept that. You then offer that with compensation, the number of people accepting it goes down. What does make a difference is if you offer monetary, because people see it as a bribe, so people will start rejecting it. What does make a difference is if you offer an in-kind compensation, and it will go up. It's the opposite. I know some very nice work in Chile was exactly about this. Right, so if you offer a school or a hospital or some kind of public good, then it will go in the opposite direction. So there's something about offering monetary compensation versus public goods which makes a difference. And I think companies are now, some companies are wise to that, so that's what they'll offer in compensation rather than the other. And I think that raises interesting issues again around the limits of monetary, is where companies recognise the limits of monetary compensation, and where they start thinking in different terms. So I think there's a whole set of issues about what kind of goods people will accept in compensation, which are in-kind compensations, versus monetary compensations, which are around this. And I should also say that companies are, they're kind of quite savvy. So I was doing some stuff on deliberative democracy and monetary valuation. And there was a representative of Rio Tinto Zinc there, who was an anthropologist who kind of sold his soul to Rio Tinto. And he was a really bright guy, and he was saying, when we go in there, people talk about the community, and he was kind of right. I've been talking about it here. He was saying, well, there's lots of different groups in the community. Let's be anthropologically sophisticated here. And there's people that will protest, and there's people that will accept. So as a company, I go in there and I identify, and my job as an anthropologist is to go in and identify for the company the people will accept against those that resist. And so people employ anthropologists to do that kind of work. Right. So even in your case, I don't know the cases, and I suspect that the communities are much more, they're kind of there's lots of different attitudes that you're going to find in a community like that. And there's NGOs and protesters like me will pick up on one part of it, and the company will pick up on another one. So they're divided in those kind of ways. But the third thing I want to say about your case is it's a classic case of desperate exchanges. And it's where, someone's so poor, you offer them anything, they're going to accept it. I mean, why is there, you take the surrogacy trade at the moment, why is India the place where that surrogacy trade is taking place? Right, you haven't got a huge commercial surrogacy thing in the United States, even where it's legal. It's not a lot of, it's because an Indian woman can earn about 5 or 10 times their yearly income. Right, in one pregnancy. So you make that kind of offer, people will accept it. You take to a poor person and say, I can sell my kidney. They'll accept it. That's why it's poor people that sell kidneys. So if people are very poor, they're put in a situation of a desperate exchange where anything, as you've said it really nicely, anything's going to improve their situation. And the economist then comes around and says, well, that means it's all free to improvement. There's no losers. Yeah. So everyone's gained. Yeah. And you want to say, actually, at that point, the proper response, I think, is not to say. I mean, this is where banning desperate. I mean, there's two responses. You can ban desperate exchanges like that, or you can say you've got to alter the background conditions, which mean that someone is willing to give up something that's so important to them because they're in such a desperately bad situation. So I think the kind of situation that you're talking about is a classic situation of desperate exchanges. And it's where it's very easy to go down the economist route and say, well, of course, there's money valuation because people are willing to accept it. It's a Pareto improvement all around, so it's great. There's no injustice. And you want to say, no, there is a justice in injustice. The injustice is in the background conditions which make it such that someone is willing to give up some of the most important things in their life. I mean, people will sell their children. People do sell their children. There's all sorts of things where people are willing to give up things that matter massively to them because they're in such a desperate situation. So I think the proper response is to say, how do we alter the background conditions for that monetary exchange in the first place? So I don't know if that answers you. Yeah.
So can I just add something? I don't know if there are studies, I mean, it's not my field, but if there are any studies, if you actually make that question geographical, and you ask the same question to equivalent communities in Chile and in the UK, and then you get, of course, very different answers of what people are willing to exchange for this particular destruction of their communities. And then you start the disparity and what is desperate exchange comes clear in what you're saying. Is there any such work actually takes the geographical dimension of these desperate exchanges and what constitutes desperate exchange in the UK or in India?
Not that I know of, but it would be really good to do.
I was wondering whether you include only monetary wealth into the distribution of justice or also the distribution of social and ecological burdens and benefits, I could answer.
Yeah. So distributional justice is about the distribution of goods and bads, right, generally. So I've just been doing some reports on climate justice in the UK. and that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about money at all. And my main point there is actually if you just focus on money, you're going to miss out on most of the injustices. So the dimensions of justice, I mean, just to run through the 4 dimensions of justice I wanted to talk about there is justice and distribution, which is generally about the distribution of goods and bad. Procedural injustice, which is who has a voice in decision making. Recognitional justice, which is about who's recognised. And finally rectificatory justice, which is much more backward. So I think those are the different dimensions of justice. But all of them can have a number of different dimensions. So I was just focusing here on a particular problem, partly because it's come up in NGOs. Right? Yeah, this is an issue that they've been concerned about, exactly how we respond to these kind of different situations of evaluation.
Yeah, first.
Yeah.
I like this distinction between backward-looking, forward-looking. And what would you think about the polluter pays principle when it's in the environmental regulation? Because polluter pays principle says that, and if you define the penalty, so you know beforehand how much you have to pay if you make wrong.
Yeah.
And for instance, in the Turkish environmental regulation, it was like a kind of improvement, like people took it as an improvement, but in fact that clarified firms, firms how much you have to pay, and that's
there's a famous, I think it's the 4 Pinto case, where there was a particular, it came out, I think that's it was a particular car which had a car park which they knew would burst into flames and kill so many people. And what they did, this is why everyone knew about it, is that they worked out in advance what their compensation payments were going to be, how much it was going to cost to rectify that bit of the car, and decided that the cost for rectifying that bit of the car was much higher than the compensation payments they were going to do. And then they went ahead with it. And that's a standard, and it's a standard problem. It's, I mean, what was I reading about just the other? It's a standard problem with drug companies when they introduce a drug where they know that there might be side effects that people are going to do. So it happens all the time. So you're right. Once there's a known monetary evaluation, what companies will do is simply treat that as a cost. Yeah, so and they do a stand, and it then appears in their cost-benefit analysis. So, so I agree with you. That's what's going on all the time, and I think there's something really clearly wrong about that. But what's interesting, when that 4 Pinto case went public, people were outraged. Right? So if you publicise something like that, and they're saying, I'm in advance thinking of, sending out a dangerous car that I know is dangerous. Well, yeah.
So is the Texaco Chevron Ecuador case not precisely a very dangerous one in many, many ways?
Mm-hmm. Well, because the company can simply...
Exactly. We do fully agree with you that we cannot monetize all these things. But, there's a payment possible for it. Does that not make the process of monetization encroach even further? I mean, your argument works very, very well against the classical economists and welfare economists. Yeah. But that's ultimately not what Chevron and others are really interested in. They're interested in going ahead with what they do, and now they can say, we very much agree with you that many things cannot be monetized in these kind of ways. But we're happy to pay all sorts of things.
But I mean, one of the interesting developments there is the recent case with Action Ecologica who was involved. So there's other ways that you can, once you recognise this, you can think, okay, we don't have to go for monetary valuation. We can do other ways of making it. So what the court case, I don't know if you know, is against BP under Ecuador's rights of nature constitution, where you can take it outside of Ecuador. So they're taking BP to court. And what they're pushing for is no monetary compensation at all. What they're pushing for is they've got to leave in the ground the equivalent amount of oil that they wouldn't have taken out. So once you recognise this, you can start thinking of much more creative ways about actually how you would take a court case like that. So you can turn around to BP and say you're not allowed to take oil out. Right. And I think, so that's where I would go with this.
I really liked your idea on what is the price of an apology? And the case of the comfort woman, it reminds me to like the German compensation for World War II damages. My mom, she worked for the German government, and they paid some compensation for the workers who worked in the ghetto in Cracovia and in the Baltic countries, and they paid 4,000 euros for anybody who worked in the ghetto for 2, 3, 4 years. And I have the feeling like this 4,000 euro was more the price of the apology than the price of the labor, which...
These are people involved in forced labour?
Yes.
Yeah. No, the German case is very interesting. I mean, as Joran keeps telling to me when I send him versions of this ultimate... I've been mucking around with this for so long now, but he keeps saying you should mention the German case. So actually, if you could talk to me afterwards, that would be quite helpful for me. Right, yeah. So,
I thank you very much because you clarify for people that are not keen on the topic some aspect of justice. But I think that is something missing. Yeah. I will take the Chevron Texaco case. What is missing is exactly the voice of indigenous people. And this is related to which kind of institution we want to implement to judge something like that. And so I was thinking about, let's say, Foucault walking around in Amazon. And Foucault will say, okay, we need popular tribunal. So where is the tribunal of indigenous people in this discourse? Where is the tribunal of indigenous people? How they will evaluate in their own imaginary and their, let's say, their own language, someone of their community that are destroying their community. So I think that we still are fighting inside our own languages, that is diversified by different languages, okay, monetary and so on. But still, we didn't accept any tribunal, popular tribunal. Not that also the Red Brigade was trying to do in the 70s, and Foucault was trying to legitimate with this discourse. So where is the indigenous people saying, I will judge these people in this way? No? How we can, let's say, first of all, really legitimize a different way of life, first of all. If we really want to legitimize how we can bridge our tribunals, our judgment, our difference of values with their values, really. No? Can we take a director of this company and say, okay, this is the director of company that destroy your people, so do whatever you want according to your value? Can we do also in parallel with this compensation in our languages and a process also this kind of legitimation of this different convention? This is...
No, I think that's right. So you're right that what we're talking about is a standard court case, with all the standard material. I mean, it'd be really nice to talk about this a bit more afterwards. I mean, because even where you think the language looks better, it still doesn't capture what's going on. So what's always struck me is the degree to which, the indigenous groups have used the language of rights as well. And the concept of rights, even in the Western tradition, is actually very recent. So you're talking, the Greeks didn't have the concept of rights. So there's classical Greeks, not Greeks. So there is a sense in which when you take all those indigenous communities, they are using what public languages evaluation are around. And even the language of the, I mean, it's kind of interesting whenever I see Joanne doing that talk, he talks about the indigenous groups using the language of the sacred. And even there, I have a slight worry, right, about that. So I remember, this goes back a long time. I always remember this as a meeting in Geneva with someone from the WTO, WHO, and then this French woman who claimed to be representing indigenous groups. And she started off saying indigenous people believe that all land is sacred. And I was thinking, there's lots of different indigenous groups, right? They're all saying that. And then I was at a meeting of the European Social Forum, and there was a Peruvian activist there, right, an indigenous activist. And he started off his talk as saying, I don't think anything's sacred. Right, was his opening sentence. He said, my main job is to rescue my culture from anthropologists and missionaries. Right. And the language of sacred is a kind of, you know, I mean, when I think of language of sacred, I think of the statues of the Sacred Heart on my mum's, you know, it comes with a certain tradition. So there's all of those. So I think you're right. There's a whole series of languages of valuation, and even the ones that look more benign are not necessarily the languages of valuation of those communities itself. It's what has power in international governance regimes. Right. So I think the questions you're raising are really good questions. Right. And what the institutional form should be to resolve that, I think, are really good. So I kind of just said very sympathetic to the question. Yeah. So I think there's clear limits to this. But all I was trying to do in this is say that activists shouldn't be worried about saying, you know, we think the company should pay, but we think there's no money value you can put on those goods.
Well, pretty much in line with the previous comments. By and large, almost all punishments come in the form of a fine. Why not be thinking of other mechanisms, such as, you know, forcing the members of the executive committee of Chevron in personally participating into the cleaning up activities for, say, a full year?
Yeah, terrific. No, I'll be very sympathetic. And again, one of the things I want to point out here is what I'm trying to get. And that's the original point I was saying about, you know, the recent BB case. Because once you realise that, once you reject the economist picture that what goes on in rectificatory justice is restoring a certain level of welfare, and there's a monetary value that does that, and you think it's in another sense about righting a wrong and expressing your recognition that a wrong has been done.
Exactly.
Then precisely all these other options become possible.
Should be on the table.
On the table, yeah. So I'm entirely sympathetic with that. And I think a year is probably too short.
From my point of view, I think that in this debate is very important point to consider. If we are talking about a project or a damage that is already done, or the people have the choice to resist or not, you know, because and if they have this chance to resist, we are talking about compensation.
Yeah. No, well, that's in a sense the Namada case and the Chevron case are exactly that contrast. So in the Namada case, people are being threatened with the damage went ahead, and they're saying there's no money value there at all. And then there's the people, you know, it was, I mean, to be fair, it was the indigenous groups, to take your point, and settlers that took the company to court. And so they're doing another way of resisting in that context. Yeah. So they've recited the forward-looking and the backward-looking, I think, in different contexts with different notions of justice involved. So I agree with what you said.
I thought it might also be interesting to look at who decides some of these things, at least in the case of investment arbitration. There was a recent report that showed that only 15 arbitrators are deciding 55% of investment arbitration cases that saw states being sued by international companies. And it seems to be reason to believe that they have conflicts of interest at play also. And that's only 15 arbitrators deciding 55% of investment cases where states and companies are basically fighting against each other. And there have been such a jump from 1996 to 2010 of something like 12 times the number of, so it's almost like a business being run. I thought it might be interesting.
No, it is very interesting. If you can give me some details afterwards, that would be great.
I found this, you said that the company did not issue an apology. Right? I find that extremely interesting in the sense that this is the exact parallel to the comfort women not receiving the monetary compensations. It's two sides of the same coin, because by not accepting to issue an apology, the company stays within its own imaginary institution that everything can be monetized and actually pays. So it's consistent with within its own logic and pays, monetizes everything. And this is a very powerful, I think, statement from the part of the company to make. And it actually further disempowers the communities that acted against it, which actually strengthens your argument about the importance of not accepting amens, because by doing so you enter the imaginary and you fully accept the rational choices, the dominant imaginary, and that will be perpetuated ad infinitum. So the only way to counteract that is not to accept. But then, this is my question really, in cases where people don't accept, so I would like to hear a bit more about the comfort groups. It stays there, doesn't it? It doesn't really challenge that.
Well, no, it does. I mean, the comfort woman case does. I mean, because what they were basically saying is we'll accept it only if the Japanese state pay it, and there's an apology with it. Right. Yeah. So they were actually demanding. So they were actually demanding exactly those things. So they would. I mean, the fund that was set up by private companies and didn't have any apology associated with it. So so it's exactly that was the
So
situation.
what happened? Did it happen?
No. So they refused.
That's what I'm trying to say. So how do we get forward?
Yeah, that's right. So their refusal was part of their campaign for it to be something else. Yeah. So and it was, you know, and the reason it's up on my slide is because it was a big story. That kind of refusal of real money was a real expression of the wrong that had happened to them. That you can't buy us off like this. And I think that's often happens. I mean, where people say, I'm just not going to accept this. You're not going to buy me out. And it is things like buy me off. It's exactly picks up that social dimension of what's going on in these kind of places.
So well, I know that probably this is going to be controversial, but I'm not sure if I agree with this idea of institutions, which is institutions are involved in this, tries to make something more just for everyone. Because, I mean, for instance, I've been working in Peru with indigenous people affected by oil activities also in the Amazon, and I mean, they sign this kind of corporate communities agreements every year between the communities and the company, and after this signature they feel like that they cannot say anything else. I mean, whatever the company do, they have accept them doing, like, still keeping on their activities like pumping oil. So if is there an oil spill, they have nothing to say because they have already signed the agreement. So, and this is a kind of, I mean, their traditional leaders like signature on this agreement. So it's like recognizing their institutions, way of recognizing their institutions, and then is the thing. I mean, most of the people probably would accept all these activities.
So it is the problem.
Yeah, but
if we legitimize their view, why is it a problem?
I mean,
our position is better one.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic topic for discussion.
I know that,
which I suggest we continue during the...
Already poor, without any support of the state, or the market, or NGOs. And basically, they don't have other opportunity more than to sell land, heritage, and community. I'm really concerned about that because they are already poor. And basically, they identify that any change, any possible change, could be better for the community. Even in leaving their lands, and even if they have to move to other places. So, in some sense, again, in my interviews, I feel like the environment was the commodity to defend something. Like, we don't have nothing more than the environment. So probably the future of my family is today this.
Who's on deal with that?
All right. Big ol'.
Good man.
I'm not a PhD fellow scientist, so sorry about that. I'm researching the construction of dams in Patagonia. Basically, at this moment, there is a negotiation about the possible compensations. In my interviews, many of the Patagonians, people who live in Patagonia for the last 100 years, they want to have a negotiation with the company. The discourse that they have said basically that they are so poor that they need something. And whatever the company can offer is better. So I'm trying to think about this topic. What happened in the case of Chile, for example, with indigenous people and with the Patagonians, who are living in marginal places in a country, who are
You have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions, discussions, argument, disagreements, etc.
Maybe we can open the floor first to the PhD fellows.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
we don't know. We'll wait for you. Until one of you speaks, nobody else is going to.
And the longer the silence lasts, the more difficult it gets.
I can deal with silence. Do people understand what that was about? Right, that's the first thing I want. I mean, what is interesting in the compensation cases is people will often reject monetary compensations. And you can get, I mean, there's some wonderful work by Bruno Frey, where it was about citing of basically toxic dumps in Switzerland. You offer, it's a classic case of crowding out, so you offer the citing of the toxic dump. So many people will accept that. You then offer that with compensation, the number of people accepting it goes down. What does make a difference is if you offer monetary, because people see it as a bribe, so people will start rejecting it. What does make a difference is if you offer an in-kind compensation, and it will go up. I know some very nice work in Chile.
It's an opportunity to solve my land, my patrimony, my community. For me, it's really sad. That's my first question. What is the situation with these communities that are already poor, and because they are poor, it's possible to build dams in their environment? And the second one is about which kind of institution have to create the compensation? The state, the companies. In the case of Chile, are the companies. So basically, the company don't want to have large compensation, just a school, a gym, some games in the plaza, and that's all. So what kind of institution can create this, can apply this framework?
Okay. A really nice question. So I'll start with the second one and then go back, because it's a slide that I took out. There was plenty of slides in there anyway.